Hey, quick question before we dive in. What language are you thinking in right now? English? Turkish? Maybe you're bilingual and switching between both? And here's a weirder question. Have you ever tried to speak a language that doesn't actually exist? No? Well, thousands of people have. And tonight, I'm going to tell you the surprisingly calming story of how some of the most famous fictional languages were born. Languages that millions of people have heard, some have learned, and a few have even gotten married in. Yes, that's real. We'll get to that. So get comfortable, dim the lights, and let me tell you about the people who decided that creating entire languages from scratch was a totally normal thing to do. This is the story of constructed languages, or as the nerds call them, conlangs. Let's start with a simple truth. Creating a language is insane. Think about it. A real language has thousands of words, complex grammar rules, exceptions to those rules, exceptions to the exceptions, verb conjugations, noun declensions, phonetic systems, writing systems, idioms, slang, regional dialects, and historical evolution spanning centuries. And some people just make that for fun, or for a movie, or because they're bored on a Tuesday. The first question you might ask is why? Why would anyone spend years, sometimes decades, creating something that nobody needs to speak? The answer is actually pretty simple and kind of beautiful. Because they can. But let's back up a bit. Before we get to Klingon and Dothraki and all the cool stuff, we need to talk about the grandfather of all constructed languages. And no, it's not Elvish. It's Esperanto. Ever heard of it? Probably. Do you know what it actually is? Maybe not. Esperanto was created in 1887 by a Polish-Jewish ophthalmologist named L.L. Zamenhof. And his motivation wasn't entertainment, it was peace. Zamenhof grew up in Bialystok, a city where people spoke Russian, Polish, German, and Yiddish, and they all hated each other. Zamenhof watched ethnic tensions boil over into violence, and he had this idealistic thought. What if there was one language everyone could speak? What if language barriers were the problem? So he created Esperanto, a language designed to be easy to learn, politically neutral, and universal. The name literally means one who hopes. How idealistic is that? Esperanto was brilliant in its simplicity. No irregular verbs, no gendered nouns, 16 grammar rules total. You could learn it in a few months. It was designed to be the world's second language, a bridge between cultures. Did it work? Well, no, not really. Today, only about 2 million people speak Esperanto, which sounds like a lot until you remember there are 8 billion people on Earth. It never became the universal language Zamenhof dreamed of. But here's the thing. Esperanto proved something important. You could create a language from scratch that actually worked. And once that door opened, people started walking through it. Before Esperanto, there was actually another attempt called Volapük, created in 1879 by a German priest named Johann Martin Schleyer. It was even more ambitious than Esperanto, with way more complicated grammar. Volapük had its moment. There were clubs, conferences, and newspapers, but it was too complex, too rigid, and eventually people abandoned it for Esperanto. Volapük is basically the Betamax of constructed languages. Technically, it existed, but Esperanto won the format war. Now, you might be wondering, what does this have to do with Game of Thrones? Everything. Because Esperanto and Volapük established a template. They proved that you could engineer a language with intention, with structure, with purpose. They showed that language creation wasn't just something that happened naturally over centuries. It could be designed. And that idea, that's what eventually gave us Dothraki, Klingon, and Na'vi. But we're not there yet. First, we need to talk about the man who changed everything. The man who didn't create languages for peace or communication. He created them because he loved them. His name was J.R.R. Tolkien. And if you think Lord of the Rings is just a book about hobbits and rings, you're missing the entire point. Tolkien didn't write stories and then add languages to make them cooler. He created languages first, and then built entire worlds around them. Let that sink in for a second. Most authors create a world, then maybe sprinkle in a few foreign-sounding words to make it feel authentic. They'll write, "The elves said something in their ancient tongue," and move on. Tolkien, he wrote the ancient tongue, all of it. Grammar, vocabulary, etymology, historical evolution, dialects, and historical evolution spanning centuries. And he didn't just make up words, he made up language families. Tolkien was a philologist. That's someone who studies the history and structure of languages. He was a professor at Oxford, specializing in Old English and Old Norse. He spent his entire academic life studying how languages evolve, how they influence each other, how sounds shift over time. And then he applied all of that knowledge to creating his own. His most famous creation is Elvish, except there's no such thing as Elvish. There's Quenya and Sindarin, and those are just the two main ones. Tolkien also created Khazd-dûl for the dwarves, the Black Speech for Mordor, and several others. Quenya was inspired by Finnish. Sindarin was inspired by Welsh. Each had its own grammar, its own phonetic rules, its own history. Tolkien started creating these languages as a teenager, years before he wrote The Hobbit, decades before Lord of the Rings. He would write poems in Quenya. He would conjugate verbs in Sindarin just to see how they felt. And here's the beautiful, slightly insane part. He enjoyed it more than writing the actual books. In his letters, Tolkien admitted that the stories were just an excuse to use the languages. Middle-earth existed so his languages had a place to live. That's like composing an entire symphony just so you have something to hum in the shower. Most people create languages to serve a story. Tolkien created stories to serve his languages. And the level of detail is absurd. He didn't just create vocabulary, he created etymology. He explained why certain words sounded the way they did. He traced how Quenya evolved from primitive Elvish. He documented sound changes over fictional millennia. He created languages that felt real because he built them like they were real. And fans noticed. Even before the Peter Jackson movies, Tolkien fans were studying Elvish. They were learning to write in Tengwar, the Elvish script. They were translating phrases, singing songs, writing poetry. There are people today who can hold basic conversations in Sindarin, not because it's useful, because it's beautiful. Tolkien proved that a language could be art, that it could be something worth creating for its own sake, and that inspired everyone who came after him. But here's the question. If Tolkien could spend decades developing Elvish because he loved languages, what happens when you need a language fast? What happens when HBO calls you and says, "We need a language for our new fantasy show, and we need it in 6 months"? You call a professional. You call someone like David J. Peterson. And that brings us to the modern era of language creation. The era where constructed languages aren't just hobby projects by obsessive professors. They're jobs. Because Hollywood realized something. If you want your fantasy world to feel real, you need a real language. And audiences can tell the difference. Think about old fantasy movies. Someone would speak in a foreign tongue and it was just the actor saying random syllables. It sounded fake because it was fake. But when Daenerys Targaryen speaks Dothraki, it sounds real because it is real. When the Na'vi speak in Avatar, it sounds alien but believable, because a linguist spent years making sure it would. Let's talk about how this actually works. Let's talk about what happens when someone gets hired to create a language for a TV show or movie. First, you need to understand the brief. The creators don't just say, "Make us a language." They say, "Make us a language that sounds harsh and guttural for a warrior culture," or "Make us a language that sounds ancient and mystical." That's like being told, "Compose a song that sounds happy," or "Paint something that feels cold." You're translating emotion and culture into phonetics. David J. Peterson got the call for Game of Thrones in 2009. HBO was adapting George R.R. Martin's books, and in those books, there were several fictional languages mentioned. Dothraki was the big one, the language of the horse-riding warrior people. In the books, Martin had written a few dozen words of Dothraki, just enough to flavor the dialogue.
HBO wanted more, much more. So Peterson got to work. He started by analyzing the Dothraki culture. Who were they? What did they value? How did they live? They were nomadic warriors. They valued strength, horses, and conquest. They had no word for throne because they didn't build permanent structures. This cultural information directly influenced the language. Peterson made Dothraki sound harsh, lots of hard consonants, guttural sounds, short, punchy words. He created vocabulary that reflected their values. They had multiple words for different types of killing, but borrowed words from other languages for things like care, because they didn't have their own. This is what separates good conlangs from bad ones. A bad conlang is just random sounds. A good one reflects the people who speak it. By the time Peterson was done, Dothraki had over 3,000 words, full grammar, verb conjugations, a writing system. And then Emilia Clarke had to learn to speak it on camera. Actors learning fictional languages is its own wild story. Most of them aren't linguists. They're just trying to remember lines that don't mean anything to them. Clarke has talked about how difficult it was. She'd get phonetic scripts with the Dothraki lines written out, and she'd practice them until they felt natural. She had to deliver emotional speeches in a language she didn't understand. Imagine trying to convey heartbreak in a language where you don't know what the words mean. You're just trusting that the sounds you're making carry the right weight. And somehow it worked. When Daenerys speaks Dothraki, it feels powerful. It feels real. That's the magic of a well-constructed language. But Dothraki wasn't Peterson's only job on Game of Thrones. He also created High Valyrian. This was the ancient language of the Targaryen ancestors, the language of old empires and dragon riders. For this one, Peterson went in the complete opposite direction. Where Dothraki was harsh and aggressive, Valyrian needed to sound elegant, ancient, noble. He based its phonetics on Latin and ancient Greek, flowing syllables, softer consonants. He also created multiple dialects, because in the world of Game of Thrones, Valyrian had splintered into different regional versions. There's High Valyrian, which is like formal Latin, and then there are Low Valyrian dialects spoken in different cities, like Astapodi Valyrian and Myernese Valyrian. Each dialect has slightly different vocabulary and pronunciation. This is insane attention to detail for a TV show, but it's also why Game of Thrones felt so immersive. The world felt lived in because the languages felt real. And Peterson wasn't the first to do this professionally. The godfather of professional language creation was Mark Okrand, and his masterpiece was Klingon. If you don't know Star Trek, here's the quick version. Klingons are an alien warrior race. They value honor, combat, and opera. Yes, opera. It's a whole thing. In the original Star Trek series from the 1960s, Klingons just spoke English, or occasionally they'd grunt some random syllables. It sounded fake because it was fake. But when Star Trek III, The Search for Spock was being made in 1984, the director wanted actual Klingon dialogue. So they hired Mark Okrand, a linguist who had worked on Native American languages. Okrand's task was to create a language that sounded alien, aggressive, and unlike any human language. And he succeeded, maybe too well. Klingon has sounds that don't exist in English. It has a grammar structure that's deliberately backwards from how we think. In English, we say, I see the ship. Subject, verb, object. In Klingon, you say, the ship see I. Object, verb, subject. It's designed to make your brain work differently. Okrand also added sounds that are physically uncomfortable for English speakers. There's a sound that's like a harsh clearing of the throat. There's another that's like choking. Why? Because Klingons are supposed to be alien. Their language should feel alien. And here's where it gets weird. People loved it. Star Trek fans didn't just appreciate Klingon as a cool detail, they learned it. There's a Klingon Language Institute. There are people who are fluent in Klingon. There's Klingon translations of Shakespeare. There are people who have gotten married in Klingon ceremonies where the vows were spoken entirely in Klingon whole. There's even a Klingon course on Duolingo. Let that sink in. You can learn Klingon more easily than you can learn some real endangered languages. Is that weird? Absolutely. Is it beautiful in its own way? Also, yes. Because what is a language really? A language is just a system humans agree on for communication. If a community decides that Klingon is their language, who's to say it's not real? Tolkien's Elvish, Okrand's Klingon, Peterson's Dothraki, these languages are real because people use them. They're not natural languages. They didn't evolve over centuries, but they function. And that brings us to maybe the most ambitious constructed language of all, Na'vi, the language of the aliens in James Cameron's Avatar. If you haven't seen Avatar, here's the setup. Humans go to a moon called Pandora. The native population are tall, blue, cat-like people called the Na'vi. Cameron wanted their language to sound completely alien, not just different from English, different from any human language. So he hired Paul Frommer, a professor of linguistics at USC, and Frommer went wild. Na'vi has sounds that are inspired by languages from all over Earth, but combined in ways no natural language does. It has ejective consonants, which are popping sounds made by building up air in your throat. It has a phoneme that's a combination of an F and a V sound at the same time. It has 7 vowels instead of the usual 5. The grammar is also beautifully complex. Verbs can have infixes, which are like prefixes but inserted into the middle of the word. So the word to hunt is toron. But if you want to say will hunt, you insert a in the middle to get tayaron. Why make it that complicated? Because Frommer wanted it to feel genuinely alien, but still learnable. And people did learn it. Before the movie even came out, Frommer released a dictionary and grammar guide. Fans started studying it, creating fan communities, writing poetry, making YouTube videos. When the movie was released, the actors had been trained to speak Na'vi fluently enough to improvise. Zoe Saldana said learning Na'vi was harder than learning the motion capture technology. And here's the thing about Avatar. The entire movie is about language. The main character, Jake Sully, learns Na'vi. He earns the trust of the Na'vi people by speaking their tongue. The climax of his character arc is when he stops thinking in English and starts thinking in Na'vi. Language isn't just window dressing in Avatar, it's the point. And that's when Hollywood really got it. A good constructed language isn't just a cool detail, it's world building, it's character development, it's immersion. Since Avatar, almost every major fantasy or sci-fi project invests in language creation.
The Netflix series The Witcher has Elder Speech, created by linguists. Dune has multiple languages, though the original book only hinted at them. Even kids' shows do it now. Dragon Prince has multiple constructed languages. We've reached the point where audiences expect it. If you're building a fantasy world and everyone just speaks English, it feels lazy. But here's a question. What makes a good constructed language? What separates a language that feels real from one that's just gibberish? Let's break it down. First, internal consistency. A good conlang has rules and it follows them. If you establish that plurals are formed by adding n to the end of words, you stick with that. You don't randomly change it. This seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how many bad conlangs break their own rules. Second, cultural grounding. The language should reflect the people who speak it. If they're warriors, they need lots of words for weapons and combat. If they're traders, they need words for negotiation and currency. Dothraki has tons of words for horses, fighting, and death. Very few words for art or philosophy. That tells you who the Dothraki are. Third, phonetic identity. Every language has a sound. French sounds romantic. German sounds harsh. Japanese sounds precise. Klingon sounds aggressive. Elvish sounds lyrical. Na'vi sounds alien. Fourth, depth. This doesn't mean the language needs 50,000 words, but it should feel like there's more beneath the surface. When you hear a character speak in a conlang, you should feel like that language has history, like there are idioms, old sayings, regional accents. You don't need to show all of it, but the suggestion that it exists is what makes it feel real. And finally, learnability. If you want fans to engage with your language, it needs to be learnable. Not easy necessarily, but possible.
Tolkien's Elvish is hard, but dedicated fans can learn it. Klingon is weird, but people speak it. Dothraki has resources, dictionaries, courses. If a language is too complicated or too poorly documented, fans will give up. And that brings us to an interesting question. Why do fans learn these languages? What's the point? Nobody needs to speak Dothraki. It won't help you get a job. It won't help you travel. You can't use it in daily life unless you have very specific friends. So why? The answer is the same reason people build model trains, collect stamps, or speedrun video games. Because it's fun. Because it connects you to something you love. When you learn a fictional language, you're not just memorizing words, you're stepping deeper into that world. You're speaking the way the elves spoke. You're thinking the way the Klingons think. It's immersive fandom taken to its logical extreme. And there's a community around it. There are forums where people discuss Dothraki grammar. There are Discord servers where people practice speaking Klingon. There are YouTube channels dedicated to teaching Sindarin. These communities are small, but they're passionate. And every so often, someone takes it to the next level. There are people who have named their kids using Elvish names. There are couples who have exchanged wedding vows in Klingon. There are people who have written entire novels in constructed languages. Is this obsessive? Maybe. Is it beautiful? Absolutely. Because language is personal. When you speak a language, you're not just communicating. You're connecting. You're expressing identity. And when you learn a language that doesn't exist, you're making a choice. You're saying, this matters to me. That's powerful. Now, let's talk about something most people don't know. Not all constructed languages are for entertainment. Some are experiments, some are art projects, some are philosophical statements. Take La'adan, for example. La'adan was created in 1982 by science fiction author Suzette Haden Elgin. She created it to test a hypothesis. Does a language shape thought? Specifically, she wanted to know if a language designed by and for women would be fundamentally different from languages created in patriarchal societies. La'adan has words for concepts that don't exist in English, like a word that means the pain of being a woman in a male-dominated world. It has grammatical structures that emphasize relationships and emotions over objects and actions. It's a language designed to express things English struggles with. Did it catch on? Not really, but it's a fascinating experiment. Or consider Tokipona, created in 2001 by linguist Sonia Lang. Tokipona is the opposite of most languages. Instead of having thousands of words, it has 120 total, the entire language. The idea is minimalism. Can you express everything you need with the smallest possible vocabulary? Turns out you can. It just requires creativity. Instead of having a word for car, you combine words. A car is a moving room or a fast box. Tokipona has a small but dedicated community. People use it as a meditative practice. Thinking in Tokipona forces you to simplify your thoughts. It's a language designed for peace of mind. And then there are the joke languages, like Pigline or Ubi-Dubby, where you insert ub before every vowel. These aren't serious constructed languages. They're games. But they're still language creation. Kids invent secret codes all the time. That's language construction at its most basic. You're creating a system for communication that outsiders don't understand. And honestly, that's where most conlangers start. David J. Peterson, Mark Okrand, Paul Fromer, they all started as kids making up languages for fun. They just never stopped. And eventually it became a career. Which brings us to the modern landscape. Today, there are professional language creators. It's a real job. There are people who make a living designing languages for movies, TV shows, video games, books. The Language Creation Society has over 500 members. There are university courses on constructed languages. There are annual conferences where conlangers share their work. It's a whole field. And it's growing, because the entertainment industry has realized that language sells immersion, and immersion sells tickets. Think about it. Would Game of Thrones have felt as epic if everyone just spoke English? Would Avatar have felt as alien? Would Lord of the Rings have felt as timeless? Probably not. Language is texture, it's detail. It's the difference between a world that feels invented and a world that feels real. And audiences care. They might not consciously notice good language design, but they feel it. They feel the weight of history when they hear Elvish. They feel the aggression when they hear Dothraki. They feel the alienness when they hear Na'vi. That's the power of a well-constructed language. It bypasses logic and hits emotion. And that's why creators keep making them. Now, here's a question for you before we move into part 2. If you could learn any fictional language, which one would you choose? Would you choose Elvish for its beauty, Klingon for its audacity, Dothraki for its power, or something else entirely? Think about it, because the language you're drawn to says something about you. Languages aren't neutral. They carry culture, values, aesthetics. When you choose to learn a language, you're choosing what you want to connect with. And that's true for real languages too. But fictional languages make it even clearer, because you're not learning them for practical reasons, you're learning them because they resonate with you. Anyway, let's pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Maybe you're getting sleepy. That's fine. That's the point. When we come back, we're going to dive deeper. We're going to talk about specific languages, their grammar, their quirks, their secrets. We're going to talk about the languages that didn't make it, the ones that failed. We're going to talk about what happens when a constructed language becomes real. And we're going to talk about the future, because this story isn't over. People are creating new languages right now, for new worlds, new stories. And some of them might outlive their creators.
Welcome back. Or, if you fell asleep, welcome to your subconscious absorbing linguistic trivia. Either way, let's continue. In part 1, we talked about the big names, Tolkien, Klingon, Dothraki. But those are just the surface. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of constructed languages scattered across fiction. Some are famous, some are obscure, some are beautiful, some are questionable. Let's take a tour. We'll start with one that most people have heard, but don't really understand. Parseltongue, the snake language from Harry Potter. In the books and movies, Parseltongue is this mysterious, sinister language. Only a few people can speak it, and it marks you as either special or dangerous. But here's the thing. Parseltongue isn't really a language. It's more like a sound effect. J.K. Rowling never created a grammar or vocabulary for Parseltongue. She just wrote, "Harry hissed something in Parseltongue," and moved on. When the movies needed actual Parseltongue dialogue, they had the actors hiss. There's no structure, no words, just snake sounds. Is that bad? Not necessarily. For the story, it works. Parseltongue doesn't need to be a full language because it's not about communication. It's about the vibe. It's creepy, mysterious, and that's enough. But compare that to something like the dragon language from Skyrim. If you've played Skyrim, you know about the Thu'um, the dragon shouts. When you shout Fus Ro Da, you're not just yelling nonsense, you're speaking dragon. And dragon is a full constructed language. It was created by Emil Pagliarulo, the games designer, with help from several linguists. Dragon has a vocabulary of over 600 words. It has grammar, it has a writing system. Each word in the dragon language is also a concept. Fus means force, Ro means balance, Da means push. So, Fus Ro Da translates roughly to force, balance, push, which mechanically means you're shouting something so hard it pushes enemies away. The language is built into the game's lore. Dragons don't just speak, their words have power. Language is magic. That's a cool concept, and it only works because the language feels real. Players have data mined the entire dragon dictionary. There are YouTube videos teaching you how to speak it. There are people who have memorized all the shout words. And here's the beautiful part. The game only uses a fraction of the language. There are hundreds of words that never appear in-game.
They exist purely for world building. That's the difference between Parseltongue and the dragon language. One is a narrative device, the other is a world. Let's talk about another deep cut. Atlantean from Disney's Atlantis Lost Empire. This is a weird one because it's a Disney movie that flopped at the box office, so not many people remember it. But the language is fascinating. Disney hired Mark Okrand, yes, the Klingon guy, and he created a language that was supposed to sound ancient, mysterious, and like it had evolved from Proto-Indo-European. He based it on real ancient languages, phonetics from Sanskrit, grammar from Latin, vocabulary from Sumerian. The result is a language that sounds old, like really old. And in the movie, the characters actually speak it, with subtitles. It's not just background flavor. The main character has to learn Atlantean to communicate. And because it's a Disney movie, there's a linguist character who explains how the language works. It's shockingly educational for a kids' film. But the movie bombed, so Atlantean never got the cultural footprint it deserved. There's a lesson here. A great language isn't enough if the story doesn't land. Dothraki is famous because Game of Thrones was a huge. Klingon is famous because Star Trek is a cultural institution. Atlantean lost to time, ironically. But let's talk about a language that succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Minionese, the language of the minions. Yes, I'm serious. You know those little yellow pill-shaped creatures from Despicable Me? They have their own language, and it's actually kind of brilliant. Minionese isn't a constructed language in the traditional sense. It's more like a linguistic remix. The directors, Pierre Coffin and Chris Reno, wanted the minions to be understood by global audiences without subtitles. So they created a language that's a mashup of English, Spanish, French, Italian, Korean, and gibberish. A minion might say bello, Italian for beautiful, then papagena, nonsense, then gelato, ice cream. It's designed so that anyone, anywhere, can catch a few words and laugh. And it worked. Minions became a billion-dollar franchise. Kids worldwide imitate minion speak. It's not a serious conlang, but it's effective. Sometimes a language doesn't need to be deep, it just needs to be fun. Now let's talk about a language that's deep, serious, and absolutely buck wild. Ithquil. Ithquil is a language created by John Kiyava, a linguist, over the course of 30 years. It's not for a book or a movie, it's a philosophical experiment. The goal? Create the most efficient, precise language possible. A language where ambiguity is impossible, where every sentence conveys maximum information with minimum words. Ithquil has 58 consonants and 13 vowels. It has 96 grammatical cases. English has 3. It can express in one word what would take English an entire sentence. For example, there's a single Ithquil word that means a situation where someone is trying to remember something they know they once knew but can't quite recall. That's one word. The trade-off is it's almost impossible to learn. Kiyada himself admits he can't speak it fluently. He has to look things up. There are maybe 5 people on Earth who have any real proficiency. But it exists, and it's beautiful in its absurdity. Ithquil represents the extreme end of language creation. It's not for communication, it's art. It's a sculpture made of grammar. And that brings us to an interesting philosophical question. When does a constructed language become a real language? Esperanto has native speakers, kids who grew up in Esperanto-speaking homes. Klingon has a community that uses it regularly. Toki Pona has people who think in it. At what point do we stop calling them constructed and start calling them just languages? The line is blurry, and honestly, maybe it doesn't matter. A language is real if people use it. That's the only criterion that counts. But let's get back to fiction. Let's talk about a language that's everywhere, but most people don't realize it's constructed. Huttese, the language of Jabba the Hutt in Star Wars. In Return of the Jedi, Jabba speaks in a guttural, slimy-sounding language, and it's subtitled. But did you know Huttese is based on Quechua? Quechua is a real language spoken in the Andes. George Lucas heard it and thought it sounded appropriately alien. So he had linguists take Quechua phrases, modify them slightly, and boom, Huttese. It's not a full language, it's more like a re-lexification, taking one language and swapping out the cultural context. But it works. Jabba sounds alien, but not incomprehensibly so. And that's a technique used a lot in Hollywood. Take a real language, tweak it a bit, and audiences won't know the difference. The problem is when you don't tweak it enough. There's a scene in Game of Thrones where Daenerys is learning Dothraki, and a fan with Middle Eastern background pointed out that one of the Dothraki words sounded exactly like an Arabic curse word. Coincidence? Maybe, but it shows the risk. When you're creating a language, you have to be careful you're not accidentally saying something offensive in a real language. David J. Peterson talks about this. He runs every word through multiple language databases to make sure he's not accidentally creating a slur in Turkish. Imagine explaining to your boss that your fantasy language accidentally means your mother is a goat in Turkish. Now, let's talk about some languages that failed. Not every conlang succeeds. Some die before they even really live. Take the language from John Carter of Mars, the 2012 Disney movie, remember it? Probably not. It's one of the biggest box office bombs in history. They hired a linguist to create Barsoomian, the language of Mars. They created grammar, vocabulary, everything. And then the movie flopped so hard that nobody cared. The language exists, technically, but does anyone speak it? No. Does anyone remember it? Barely. A language needs a community to survive. Without that, it's just words in a file somewhere. Same thing happened with the language from Jupiter Ascending. Another box office bomb. Another dead language. Even with all the resources of Hollywood, you can't force a language into existence. It has to catch fire naturally. And that's what makes the success story so impressive. Klingon could have died after Star Trek III, but fans kept it alive. Dothraki could have been a footnote, but Game of Thrones became a phenomenon. Luck plays a role, timing plays a role, but most of all, passion plays a role. Fans decide if a language lives or dies.
Now, let's talk about video games. Because video games are the new frontier for constructed languages. In a movie, you hear a language for maybe 30 seconds at a time. In a game, you might hear it for 60 hours, so it better be good. The Witcher games have Elder Speech, the language of the elves. It's based on Welsh, Irish, and Old English. It sounds ancient and mystical. But here's the thing. The games don't just have characters speak it. They have it written on signs, in books, on gravestones. Players can translate it, and they do. There are entire wikis dedicated to translating every bit of Elder Speech in the game. That's world building on a level most movies can't touch. Or look at Horizon Zero Dawn. In that game, there are ancient human civilizations that left behind data logs in old languages. The game doesn't translate them. You have to piece together what happened from context. It's environmental storytelling through language. And it works because players are willing to engage with it. That's the key. A constructed language only works if people care. If your audience doesn't care about the world, they won't care about the language. But if they love the world, they'll learn Elvish. Let's talk about learning, because I mentioned earlier that people actually learn these languages. But how? How do you study a language that doesn't have a Rosetta Stone? Well, for the popular ones, there are resources. Duolingo has Klingon and High Balerian courses. There are textbooks for Quenya and Sindarin. There are YouTube channels dedicated to teaching Dothraki. There are Discord servers where people practice speaking Navi. It's surprisingly organized. But learning a conlang is different from learning a natural language. With Spanish or French, you can immerse yourself. You can travel to a country where it's spoken. With Klingon, you're stuck with textbooks and forums. You can't immerse yourself in Dothraki. There's no Dothraki country. So learners have to be creative. They watch Game of Thrones scenes over and over, repeating the lines.
They write journals in Elvish. They narrate their day in Klingon. It's self-directed, obsessive learning, and the payoff is purely personal. You're not learning it to get a job. You're learning it because it brings you joy. That's pure. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Is this weird? Is it weird to spend hundreds of hours learning a language that isn't real? Honestly, no weirder than any other hobby. People spend thousands of hours painting miniatures for tabletop games. People memorize every stat of every Pokemon. People learn to speedrun video games. Hobbies are, by definition, things we do because we enjoy them, not because they're useful. And learning a conlang is a hobby that actually exercises your brain. You're learning grammar, vocabulary, phonetics. You're building neural pathways. It's basically a workout for your language center. So if someone judges you for learning Dothraki, just remember, they probably binge watch reality TV. We all waste time. At least you're learning something. Now, let's talk about the dark side of language creation. Because not every constructed language is wholesome. Some are political, some are controversial. Take Newspeak from George Orwell's 1984. Newspeak is a constructed language designed to limit thought. The idea is, if you eliminate words for rebellion, people can't think rebellious thoughts. It's a language created for control. Orwell didn't fully flesh out Newspeak, but he outlined the concept. And it's terrifying, because language does shape thought, to some extent. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggests that the language you speak influences how you perceive reality. If your language doesn't have a word for freedom, do you even understand the concept? That's the idea behind Newspeak. It's dystopian, but it's also thought-provoking. Orwell was warning us, language is power. Whoever controls language controls thought. And in a way, that's what all conlangers are doing. They're creating systems of thought. When Tolkien created Elvish, he was creating a way of seeing the world. When Peterson created Dothraki, he was creating a warrior mindset. Language isn't neutral. It carries worldview. And that's heavy, but also beautiful, because it means language creation is more than just vocabulary and grammar. It's philosophy. Every conlanger is in a small way a god. They're creating the rules by which a culture thinks. That's wild. Now, let's lighten the mood. Let's talk about the funniest constructed language ever made, Pig Latin. Okay, it's not sophisticated, but it's technically a conlang. The rules are simple. Take the first consonant of a word, move it to the end, and add AY. Hello becomes Elohei. Language becomes Anguage Elay. It's a children's game, but it's language construction. And it works. Kids use it to create in-groups. Can you speak Pig Latin? It's a test. It separates the insiders from the outsiders. That's what language has always done. From ancient tribes to modern nations, language creates identity. And Pig Latin, silly as it is, does the same thing. It's a reminder that language creation doesn't have to be serious. It can be playful. It can be a joke. Some of the best conlangs are the ones that don't take themselves too seriously. Like the language from The Sims, Simlish. You know, that gibberish the Sims speak? That's actually a constructed language, sort of. The voice actors were given directions. Sound happy, sound sad, sound angry. They improvised nonsense syllables, and it became Simlish. It's not structured, there's no grammar, but it has a phonetic identity. You can tell Simlish from other nonsense languages, and fans love it. There are Simlish versions of real songs. Katy Perry has sung in Simlish. It's absurd, and perfect, because The Sims doesn't need a real language. It needs a vibe, and Simlish delivers. Alright, let's talk about something academic for a second. There's a term in linguistics, naturalistic versus artistic conlangs. Naturalistic conlangs try to mimic how real languages work. They have irregularities, exceptions, messy bits. Because real languages aren't perfect, they evolve messily over time. Tolkien's Elvish is naturalistic. It has irregular verbs, historical sound changes, dialects. It feels like it evolved naturally, even though it didn't. Artistic conlangs are the opposite. They prioritize aesthetics or philosophy over realism. Ithquil is artistic. It's too perfect to be natural. Tokipona is artistic. Real languages don't minimize like that. Neither is better. They're just different goals. Naturalistic conlangs are for immersion. Artistic conlangs are for experimentation. Both are valid. And some conlangs are a mix. Klingon is artistic in its harshness, but naturalistic in its grammar complexity. Dothraki is naturalistic in structure, but slightly artistic in its cultural specificity. It's a spectrum. Now, here's a question. What's the hardest fictional language to learn? Most people would say Klingon or Ithquil, but there's an argument for Quenya, because Tolkien never finished it. He kept revising, changing rules, adding words. There are multiple versions of Quenya in his notes. Scholars have to piece together what's canon. It's like trying to learn a language from a draft that was never finalized. Dedicated fans have done it, but it's hard. And that raises an interesting point. Who decides what's correct in a conlang? With Dothraki, it's David J. Peterson. He's the authority. With Klingon, it's Mark Okrand. But with Tolkien's languages, Tolkien is dead. So now it's scholars and fan communities who decide. They vote on interpretations. They debate grammar. It's like biblical exegesis, but for Elvish. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. The language has outlived its creator and taken on its own life. That's the dream, right? To create something that continues without you. Tolkien achieved that. Whether Peterson or Okrand will, time will tell. But there's a good chance that in 100 years, people will still be learning Klingon. Not because it's useful, because it's cultural. Language is culture, and culture persists. All right, let's talk about the economics of language creation. How much does it cost to hire someone to make a language? It varies wildly. For a small indie film, you might get a college student to do it for cheap. For a big budget show like Game of Thrones, you're paying professional rates. David J. Peterson has said he got paid around $20,000 for creating Dothraki and High Valyrian. That sounds like a lot, but remember, he worked on it for years, and he had to create thousands of words, full grammar, and coach actors. Break it down hourly, it's not that much. For Avatar, Paul Fromer got a similar deal. But the real money isn't in the initial creation, it's in the consulting. Every time an actor needs to learn lines, the linguist gets paid. Every time a new script needs translation, the linguist gets paid. So over the course of a franchise, it adds up. But most conlangers don't do it for the money. They do it because they love languages. It's a passion that happens to pay, which is the dream, right? Getting paid to do what you do for free anyway.
Now let's talk about the future. Where is language creation going? One trend is AI-assisted conlanging. There are now tools where you input parameters, how harsh, how complex, what influences, and the AI generates a language. It's not perfect. AI doesn't understand culture the way a human does, but it can speed up the grunt work, generating vocabulary, checking consistency, suggesting phonetic patterns. Some purists hate this. They think it's cheating. Others see it as just another tool. Honestly, it depends on how it's used. If AI generates the whole language and the creator just slaps their name on it, that's lazy. But if AI helps with the tedious parts so the creator can focus on the cultural stuff, that's smart. Either way, it's happening. And in 10 years, we'll probably see languages created in collaboration with AI. Another trend, interactive conlangs. Video games where the language evolves based on player choices. Imagine a game where your civilization's language changes depending on how you develop. If you focus on war, the language gets harsher. If you focus on trade, the language borrows words from neighbors. That's next level world building. And it's technically possible now. We just haven't seen it yet, but we will. Finally, let's talk about the weirdest possible future. What if a conlang becomes more popular than the media it was created for? What if in 50 years more people speak Klingon than have seen Star Trek? It sounds absurd, but language has a way of outliving its origin. Latin was a language of the Roman Empire. The empire fell 1,500 years ago. Latin is still used. Could Klingon follow a similar path? Probably not, but maybe. Stranger things have happened. All right,
Before we wrap up part 2, let's do a quick lightning round. Favorite underrated conlang? The Loxian language from Enya's music. Yes, Enya made a language. It's beautiful. Weirdest conlang? Solar Soul, a language based on musical notes. You can speak it or sing it. Most ambitious conlang? Ithquil, no contest. Most beautiful conlang? Sindarin, fight me. Most fun conlang? Mignonese. Most terrifying conlang? Newspeak. Most likely to actually become a universal language? Esperanto, but it's losing ground to English. And with that, let's take another breath. Maybe stretch, get some water. We're almost there. In part 3, we're going to bring it all home. We're going to talk about why this matters, why we care about fake languages, what it says about us, and where it's all going. See you in a minute, or tomorrow morning if you fell asleep. Welcome to the final part. If you're still awake, congratulations. If you're asleep and your subconscious is absorbing this, hello down there. Let's talk about the big picture. Why do we do this? Why do humans create languages that don't need to exist? The easy answer is for fun, for art, for storytelling. But I think it's deeper than that. I think we create languages because we're trying to understand ourselves. Language is the most human thing we do. Animals communicate, but they don't have grammar, they don't have syntax, they don't create new words. Language is what separates us from every other species. And when we create a new language, we're flexing that muscle. We're proving we can. We're playing God in the most fundamental way. Because in the beginning, according to most creation myths, there was the Word. Language creates reality. And when we create language, we're creating reality, even if that reality is fictional. Think about it. When Tolkien created Quenya, he created a way of thinking. He created a worldview. He created a culture. The elves don't exist, but their way of seeing the world does. It exists in the language. And when you learn Quenya, you're stepping into that worldview. You're seeing the world the way an elf would. That's powerful. That's not just entertainment. That's empathy. You're literally learning to think like someone else, even if that someone is fictional. And that's beautiful, because empathy is in short supply. We live in a world where people struggle to understand each other, where language is used to divide, not unite. But when you learn a fictional language, you're practicing understanding. You're practicing stepping outside your own head. You're practicing seeing the world differently. And maybe, just maybe, that makes you a little better at understanding real people too. That's optimistic, I know, but I think there's truth to it. Because language learning, real or fictional, changes your brain. It makes you more flexible. It makes you better at seeing multiple perspectives. And we need more of that. Now let's talk about community, because that's the other reason we create languages, to build communities. Every fandom is a community, but fandoms with constructed languages have something extra. They have a secret handshake. When you meet someone who speaks Klingon, you have an instant bond. You're part of a club. A small, weird club, but a club nonetheless. And in a world that's increasingly isolated, that matters. People are lonely. They're looking for connection. And sometimes that connection comes through shared obsession with a fictional language. Is that strange? Maybe. But it's also human. We've always created in-groups through language. Every profession has jargon. Every subculture has slang. Constructed languages are just the logical extreme. And the internet has made it easier than ever. 30 years ago, if you wanted to learn Klingon, you had to find the 3 other people in your city who cared. Now you can join a Discord server with thousands of members. You can attend virtual conventions. You can take online courses. The barriers are gone. And that's led to an explosion of interest. More people are learning Konglangs now than ever before. Not because they're more useful, because they're more accessible. And because people are hungry for it. They're hungry for something to be passionate about, something that feels meaningful, even if it's just a hobby. And learning a language, even a fictional one, feels meaningful. It feels like growth, like achievement, like you're building something. And that's what we're all looking for, right? A sense of progress, a sense of purpose, even if that purpose is, I can now insult you in Dothraki. Now, let's talk about the critics, because not everyone thinks this is great. There are people who think constructed languages are a waste of time, that we should be preserving endangered real languages instead of inventing new fake ones. And they have a point. There are thousands of languages dying right now, languages with centuries of history, with rich oral traditions, with irreplaceable cultural knowledge. And we're letting them die while we invent Klingon. That's a fair criticism. But here's the thing, it's not either or. The people creating Dothraki aren't the same people who would be preserving endangered real languages. They're different skill sets, different interests. And honestly, Conlangs might actually help because they make people think about language. They make people appreciate linguistic diversity. Someone who learns Elvish might become curious about real languages. They might become a linguist. They might end up preserving endangered languages. It's a pipeline. And even if it's not, is it really harmful? People spend time on all sorts of hobbies, collecting stamps, building model trains, watching sports. Why is learning Klingon worse than collecting baseball cards? It's not. It's just different. And we should let people enjoy things. As long as it's not hurting anyone, why judge? Now, let's talk about something academic for a moment. There's a field called conglanging, or language construction. It's a real area of study. Universities offer courses on it. There are textbooks. There are journals. It's not just a hobby anymore. It's a discipline. And that's fascinating, because 50 years ago, it didn't exist. Tolkien was a lone weirdo. Now there are hundreds of people doing what he did. And they're learning from each other. They're sharing techniques. They're pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Some are creating languages with sounds humans can't make. Alien languages for alien species. Languages that require 3 vocal cords. Languages that are entirely whistled. Languages that are entirely signed. The creativity is endless. And it's not just for entertainment. Some linguists use conlangs to test theories. They create a language with a specific feature and see what happens. It's a laboratory for language. You can't experiment on real languages with ethical issues, but you can create a fake language and do whatever you want. It's like a sandbox for linguistics, and that has real scientific value. So even the most useless Konglang might contribute to our understanding of language, which is kind of cool. Now, let's talk about the ultimate question. Could a constructed language ever replace a natural language? Could Esperanto actually become the global language? The short answer is probably not. Natural languages have inertia. They have billions of speakers, centuries of literature, institutional support. You can't just replace that. But could a constructed language become a significant language? Maybe, if the right conditions align. If a massive piece of media becomes so culturally dominant that its language seeps into daily life. If a generation grows up speaking it. If it becomes a marker of identity. It's not impossible. Unlikely, but not impossible. Hebrew was a dead language for centuries. It was revived in the 20th century and is now the official language of Israel. If a dead language can be resurrected, a constructed language can be born. It just needs the right moment, the right movement, the right passion. And who knows, maybe in 100 years, kids will learn Dothraki in school. Probably not, but maybe. Now, let's talk about you. Yes, you, listening to this. What's your relationship with language? Do you speak multiple languages? Do you struggle with your native language? Do you wish you could express things you don't have words for? Everyone has a language story. Maybe you grew up bilingual and feel caught between 2 worlds. Maybe you studied a language in school and forgot it all. Or maybe you're one of the rare people who thinks language is boring. If so, you probably didn't make it this far into a 2-hour video about constructed languages. But if you're still here, you care. Even if you don't speak a Konglang, even if you never will, you care about language. And that's worth acknowledging, because language is personal. It's how we think, It's how we connect. It's how we understand the world. And when we learn a new language, even a fictional one, we expand that understanding. We add new tools to our mental toolkit. We become more than we were. And that's always valuable. Now, let's talk about the future one more time. What's next for constructed languages? I think we're going to see more integration with technology. Imagine VR worlds where everyone speaks a Konglang. You put on a headset and you're in a world where Dothraki is the common tongue. You have to learn it to navigate. That's immersive language learning on a level we've never seen. Or imagine AI that can generate a custom language for your D&D campaign. You tell it the culture, the vibe, the influences, and it creates a language overnight. Then you and your friends learn it together. That's not far off. The tools are almost there. We're also going to see more diversity in who creates languages. Historically, it's mostly white men. Tolkien, Okran, Peterson, Quijada. But that's changing. More women are entering the field. More people of color. More perspectives. And that's exciting, because language diversity is beautiful. Even fictional language diversity.
Now, let's address the elephant in the room one more time. Is this all just escapism? Are we creating fake languages because we can't deal with the real world? Maybe, but so what? Escapism isn't inherently bad. We all need breaks from reality. We all need spaces where we can be creative, playful, obsessive. For some people, that's sports. For some, it's cooking. For some, it's learning Klingon. As long as it brings joy and doesn't hurt anyone, it's valid. And honestly, in a world that's increasingly stressful, we need more escapism. We need more joy. We need more things that make us feel like kids again. Learning a fictional language is pure. It's curiosity for the curiosity's sake. It's learning for the love of learning. And that's rare. Most of us learn things because we have to, for work, for school, for survival. But when you learn Elvish, it's because you want to. And that's powerful. That's agency. That's freedom. So if you're listening to this and thinking, maybe I want to learn a conlang, do it. Don't overthink it. Just pick one and start. Start with Duolingo's High Valyrian course, or find a Sindarin textbook, or join a Klingon Discord. You don't have to become fluent. You don't have to master it. Just play with it. See how it feels. See what it teaches you. Because even if you never use it, you'll have learned something about language, about yourself, about why humans do the weird, wonderful things we do. And that's worth it. Now, let's talk about legacy. What will the legacy of constructed languages be? 100 years from now, will people still learn Elvish? Will Klingon be in museums? Will Dothraki be a historical curiosity? Or will they evolve? Will they be spoken by communities that have outlived the media that created them? I don't know, but I hope so, because these languages represent something important. They represent human creativity, human obsession, human love. People created these languages because they cared, because they wanted to build something beautiful, and that's worth preserving. Even if the original movies and shows are forgotten, the languages might survive. Languages have a way of doing that. Latin outlived Roma. Sanskrit outlived the Vedic period. Maybe Quenya will outlive Tolkien's fame. Maybe in 500 years, people will speak Elvish without knowing who created it. They'll think it's ancient. They'll think it's real. And in a way, it will be. Because if enough people use it, it becomes real. That's the magic of language. It's a shared hallucination. We all agree these sounds mean these things, and that agreement makes it real. Constructed languages are the same. They start as one person's imagination, but if enough people adopt it, it becomes collective, it becomes culture, it becomes real. And that's beautiful. Now, let's come full circle. Back to that first question. Why do humans create languages? Because we can. Because we must. Because creating is what makes us human. We create art, music, stories, buildings, technologies,
And we create languages, because language is the ultimate creative act. It's creating the very tool we use to create everything else. It's meta, it's recursive, it's beautiful, and it's universal. Every culture creates, every culture tells stories, every culture builds worlds. And some of those worlds need their own languages, so we make them. And in making them, we discover something about ourselves. We discover that we're not bound by what exists. We can imagine new ways of thinking, new ways of speaking, new ways of being. And that's hopeful, because if we can create new languages, we can create new futures. We're not stuck with the world as it is. We can imagine better. And imagination is the first step to change. So yeah, constructed languages might seem like a weird niche hobby, but they're also a testament to human potential. They're proof that we can build anything we can imagine, even if it's just words, especially if it's just words, because words matter. Words shape reality. Words create worlds, and we're the ones who get to choose what words we create. Now, before we end, one final question. If future historians look back at our time, what would they make of constructed languages? Would they see them as frivolous, as art, as a symptom of our media-saturated culture? Or would they see them as something deeper, as a sign that we were searching for connection, for meaning, for new ways to understand each other? I'd like to think the latter. I'd like to think that in 200 years, someone will study Dothraki the way we study ancient languages today. They'll analyze its grammar. They'll trace its cultural influences. They'll wonder about the people who spoke it. And they'll realize these people weren't escaping, they were exploring. They were pushing boundaries. They were asking, what if? And what if is the most important question humans ask. What if we could fly? What if we could cure disease? What if we could speak a language that doesn't exist yet? That last one might seem smaller, but it's the same impulse, the same refusal to accept limits, the same insistence that we can create. And that's what I hope you take away from this. Whether you ever learn a conlang or not, whether you think they're silly or profound, the point is, we can create, we can imagine, we can build, and that's never a waste of time. So, here we are, 2 hours later. You made it. Or you fell asleep somewhere in part 2 and this is all dream logic now. Either way, thanks for listening. Thanks for caring about this weird, wonderful topic. And if you're thinking about learning a conlang, I'll leave you with this. The first word of Quenya that Tolkien ever created was kalme. It means death. Not hello, not love, death. Because even in a language created for beauty, Tolkien understood that we need words for the hard things, for the endings, for the inevitable. But here's the thing about languages, even fictional ones. They don't die as long as someone speaks them. So if you learn even one word of Elvish, Klingon, Dothraki, or any other conlang, you're keeping it alive. You're part of its story. And that's pretty cool. All right, that's it. I'm done. Go to sleep. Or don't. Either way, you've just spent 2 hours learning about languages that don't exist. And I think that's beautiful. Good night. Or good morning, depending on where you are. And hey, if you remember anything from this video, remember this. Language is magic, even when we make it up. Especially when we make it up. Sweet dreams. Or as they say in Elvish, olovai. Actually, I just made that up. But that's the point, isn't it? We can. Good night.